The sad reality. Izuku's POV unless said otherwise. Inko Izuku. I could hear the door rattling, but it was no use. I'd locked it tight while I lay in my bed, completely buried under my blanket. This wasn't unusual, but I still hated these moments more than anything. Inko Izuku Midioriya. The rattling grew worse, and I tried my best to tune it out. The sound of the door, the handle, and the lock clattering as someone banged on it with force was all too familiar to me. Inko am I a joke to you? Answer me. Curled up under the blanket, I started biting my fingernails as the noise made me more nervous than I already was. The banging only got louder, refusing to stop. Inko, you're a disgrace of a son. Me. It'd been a year since I last left my room. That's why it was littered with instant noodle cups and other junk. I hated the outside world so much. It was cruel to people like me. Where did it all start? Flashback brought to you by a hiding bunny. I was shoved against the trash bags behind the school like I often was. It wasn't the worst thing that could happen, but it was far from pleasant. Every day felt like a nightmare, and this was just one version of it. I tried fighting back, stupid idea. It only earned me more kicks and punches, plus a few quirks thrown my way. A quirkless guy like me needed protection, not this, but no one seemed to get that. Out of breath and dazed from the beating, I suddenly felt a shoe slam into my face. Me AGH. Kakin, what are you staring at, huh? Me, hey. Did he really expect an answer when my face was swollen and I could taste blood? This was my normal, or so they said. Blood again. School was no different from home. Things got so bad that every day hurt more than the last. There were times I wished it would all just end. I despised the people who hurt me. Kakin, come here, you little punk. Still dazed, I felt Kakin grab my hair and yank me up to face him. I regretted being at this school, regretted even being born, but I never had a say in it. Did I choose this? No, who would want this nightmare? No one sane would, and I hated it too. Kakin, hey Deku. I glanced up, catching his smug grin. He enjoyed this. To everyone else, he was a hero society needed, but to me, he was the real villain. Kakin, guess you still haven't learned your lesson. Learned my lesson? Maybe I knew what he wanted but refused to give in. Maybe all I had left was my pride, or whatever scraps of it remained. What he wanted, I wasn't ready to give, yet. Kakin, crawl like a dog for me. Yeah, I'd never do that, never, or so I thought. But I was at my limit. I didn't know what else to do. I could feel it. He'd destroy me if I didn't obey. I was terrified of the pain, the bruises, the burns. I was so tired of it all. Before I realized it, I was on my hands and knees, crawling toward the guy who just shoved me down. It was a new low, but I'd survive it. That's what mattered. For someone like me, clinging to life like this, I didn't feel worth it, but I couldn't stop myself either. Kakin, bwhhha, he's actually crawling. Kirishima, hahaha, why don't you bark too? I looked up at their amused faces as tears streamed down my cheeks, blood still dripping from my nose. My lip was split, too, stinging as it bled. Mia woofed. Once I started, I kept going, getting louder while they laughed. I was scared and desperate to survive. Who knew what they'd do if I stopped? Oh, how much I hated it. Mia woof woof. In the end, all I wanted was for this miserable life to stop. Kidnapped. Izuku's POV unless said otherwise. I wasn't sure when I fell asleep, though it felt more like passing out from exhaustion than actual rest. When I woke up, my body was covered in bruises and every movement made me wince. I'd taken a beating and now I had to go out for more instant food. I hated leaving my room, especially with the pain from bruises and sore muscles nagging me. Life wasn't kind and I wasn't too fond of myself either. Still, I had no choice, so I left the house. A rare event. I pulled my hoodie over my messy hair and kept my head down, glancing left and right, always worried someone might spot me and make things worse. This was my life as a quirkless outcast. It was a weekday and my mom was at work, not due back until late. Being alone in the quiet house was the one thing I enjoyed. No yelling, no pain, just silence. I'd come to treasure it. The sun stung my skin as I stepped outside. I hate this. Why did I have to run out of food? Looking around, I saw happy people laughing and chatting, others glued to their phones, minding their own business. Then there was me, trying to disappear, desperate to get this over with. Going out felt like its own kind of torment. All right, calm down. My heart was racing. I can't do this, just breathe. I just need to grab some noodles and get out of here. What if I run into someone I know? No, that won't happen. Just calm down. There's no way I'd see Kakin or anyone from UA's hero class. I dropped out of Gen Ed anyway. It's better this way. In the past year, I hadn't ventured more than 50 meters from home. My destination was always the same convenience store down the road. I was glad I'd given up on UA and my dream of being a hero. I'd have been a terrible student and an even worse hero. I tried the hero course for 2 weeks, long enough to mingle with the class, but I felt so out of place that I transferred to Gen Ed and swapped spots with another student. It didn't take long to reach the store. I knew exactly where the noodles were and which ones I'd grab. Nothing ever changed except the weather and the time of day. They're out of my favorite noodles. Wait. Why does it feel like someone watching me? There's no one here except the part-time cashier. Why does it seem like he's staring at me? Does he recognize me, maybe from that time I tried to save Kakin? No, impossible. I hated how the part-timers here were always different. New faces made me uneasy. The feeling of being watched crept up on me and I couldn't shake it. I grabbed some instant noodles and ramen, heading to the counter to pay. The cashier's eyes seemed to follow me and it was starting to freak me out. Part-timer, that'll be $15. Me, just a sec. Part-timer, take your time. Me, got it right here. Where's my wallet? I could have sworn it was in my pocket. Did I forget it? No way. I'm such an idiot. Part-timer, don't worry. As I fumbled for my wallet, the cashier chuckled. I looked up and that's when my heart stopped. My mind raced, but my body froze. He was smirking, holding a towel in his hand. Before I could process it, he pressed it over my mouth. I didn't know him, but I knew this wasn't good. Part-timer, I'll collect the money from someone else later. Me, MMPH. Of course I fought back. Me, oof. I struggled with everything I had, trying to break free, but then I noticed he had quirks. 8 arms, all holding me tight, keeping me from escaping. My anxiety was already through the roof from leaving the house, and now my heart pounded even harder. Me, MMPH. I'd always known my life was doomed to be miserable from start to finish. No matter how hard I fought, it was useless. My strength faded, my body gave out, and my legs buckled. I collapsed to the floor, barely clinging to consciousness. This was bad beyond bad, but I refused to give up completely. I mean, I knew my life was a mess, worse than I could have imagined, but this was a whole new level of awful, even for me. Seriously. A kidnapping. Out of everything, kidnapping. Not an accident, not robbery, not even giving up on my own, but kidnapping. What rotten luck I had. The kidnapper. Izuku's POV unless said otherwise. When I came to, I felt awful. Me, Yuahe. My head. Where am I? I opened my eyes to a dark room. The door had bars like something out of a prison, but the space was larger than a typical cell. I don't feel good. Did I just get kidnapped? Or worse, trafficked? Why am I even thinking that? No one would want someone useless like me, though people can be strange, so maybe. Wait. More importantly, I'm tied up. Well, joke on them, no one's coming to save me if this is a kidnapping. My mom wouldn't pay a dime. Are you all right? The voice startled me, snapping me out of my daze. I thought you might be hungry, so I brought you some food. I couldn't believe my eyes. Standing there was someone I'd never forget. Todoroki, I don't know if you'll like it, but you should eat anyway. Is he the one who kidnapped me? Shodo Todoroki, Endeavor's son, was right in front of me, setting a bowl of porridge on a table nearby. I was so stunned I couldn't find words. Todoroki, eat up. Me, how? It was a dumb question, but I was tied up and I hoped he'd untie me. Instead, he grabbed my head and pushed it toward the bowl. I was still on the floor, so it wasn't a hard shove, but it caught me off guard. I couldn't eat like that. I ended up choking and coughing as some of it went up my nose. Me, URGH. No matter how much I squirmed, his grip held firm, forcing my face closer to the bowl like I was some kind of animal. Me cough MMPH. After what felt like forever, he finally let go. I gasped for air, coughing and spitting out what little I'd accidentally swallowed. My stomach churned and I felt sick. All I got in return was a pat on the head from this creep. Todoroki, what a good boy. Me cough cough, what do you think you're? He cut me off by shoving me aside, letting me get a better look at him. Me explain yourself, Shoto. Shoto, you still remember me, how exciting. Shoto Todoroki, was he always this unhinged? I knew he'd had a rough time with his dad, but this was extreme even for him. Me, did you kidnap me? Shoto, huh, kidnap, that's ridiculous. I just brought you here and locked you up. Me, that's the same thing, you jerk. I didn't yell often, but I was furious. How could I not be in a situation like this? Me, untie me right now, this is a crime, you know. Shoto, I can't. If I untie you, you'll leave. Anyway, we'll talk later after you finish your food. Me, no, let me go now. Did he really expect me to eat off the floor? No way. I wasn't that desperate, and who knew what was in that porridge? Shoto, I'll be back. Me, what? Just like that, he left. I thought I saw his face flush, but it was probably my imagination. A chill ran down my spine. This was not where I wanted to be. He might be crazier than his dad. How was I supposed to eat from a bowl with no hands? Did he really expect me to act like a dog? I'm in serious trouble. I didn't get it. Should I scream? Would that just make things worse? I was scared. This guy seemed completely out of his mind. And who was that creep who grabbed me at the convenience store? Shoto's supposed to be a hero in training, a future hero. Why was he doing this? There was no chance my mom would come for me. If anything, she'd be glad I was gone. How long have I been here? What do I do? Time dragged on. I couldn't tell how much until the door creaked open again. Shoto stepped back inside. Shoto, did you wait for me like a good little boy? The way he talked, the way he acted, it was all wrong. But in this messed up society, treating a quirkless person like me this way was almost normal. Still, I couldn't help wondering what led to this. Shoto, you didn't eat your porridge. You shouldn't be so picky. Me, untie me right now. Shoto, oh, but I got a present for you. Me, I don't want it, just untie me already. Shoto, I'll give you your present first. Me, I don't need a present. Shoto, are you ready? Me. Shoto, turn around. He didn't help me turn. Instead, he kicked me, rolling me over. With the bruises I already had from yesterday, it hurt a lot and I let out a sharp cry. He didn't care. What I saw next left me speechless. Bakugo was there, tied up, restrained in a way that looked uncomfortable. He was struggling, but it was no use. A collar around his neck, probably a quirk suppression device, kept him in check. His mouth was taped shut, silencing his usual outbursts. The desperation in his eyes told me he wanted out as badly as I did. Kakin. The punishment. I froze. Kakin, I gasped, my voice trembling. That's him, our classmate. I was freaking out, my heart racing, but Shoto stood there like it was no big deal. The problem was, how was I supposed to get out of this mess and get Kakin out too? Sure, he'd done some awful things that maybe justified him being here, but I didn't want his fate weighing on my conscience. Shoto glanced at me, his voice cold. Yeah, he's our classmate, but he's also a total jerk who deserves to be taught a lesson. He was saying exactly what I'd been thinking for a while now, stuff I couldn't bring myself to admit out loud. Before I could respond, Shoto turned and I noticed a flicker of flame curling around his hand. If he was about to do what I feared, this was going to get bad fast. I should have yelled, moved, done something to stop him, but I couldn't. Deep down, part of me felt like Kakin had this coming. Let me explain, Shoto said calmly, grabbing Kakin by the collar. His other hand flared with a small burst of fire, just enough to make a point. Kakin grunted, struggling against the ropes. MMPH. "We're going to play a little game," Shoto continued, his tone dark. "It's called payback time." I didn't know what to say. I just stood there watching as Shoto pressed his flaming hand close to Kaken's shoulder, not enough to seriously hurt him, but enough to leave a faint red mark. The smell of singed fabric hit me and I gagged, turning away. Shoto noticed and immediately stopped, shoving Kaken back into the chair. "I'm sorry," Shoto muttered, stepping out of the room, but when he returned I couldn't believe what he was holding, a roll of duct tape and a bucket of ice water. "Deku, help me," Kaken shouted, his voice cracking as Shoto ripped the tape off his mouth. "This guy's unhinged, he's lost it." For a moment we were alone. Kaken's eyes locked onto mine, desperate. "We've been classmates forever, right? I know I was a jerk to you and I'm sorry, okay? But this guy might actually listen to you. We were friends once, remember? Please save me." His begging hit me hard, but instead of pity I felt a surge of anger. I'd been in his shoes once, picked on, pushed around, laughed at while he stood by smirking. Now that the tables had turned, he wanted forgiveness. "I'm tied up too," I snapped. "I can't do anything, and even if I could, why should I?" "You little," Kaken started, but I cut him off. "Think about that while you deal with him," I said, nodding toward Shoto, who just walked back in, laughing under his breath. I hated Kaken, hated him with everything I had. And now his punishment was starting and I didn't even have to lift a finger. I couldn't stop a small, bitter laugh as Shoto grabbed Kaken by the arm and dragged him a few feet away. "No," Kaken yelled, thrashing as Shoto dumped the bucket of ice water over his head. The cold hit him hard and he gasped, shivering violently. Shoto smirked. "Refreshing, isn't it?" He formed a small shard of ice in his hand and tapped it against Kaken's arm, not stabbing, just pressing it enough to make him flinch. "Consider this a wake-up call." Kaken yelped, jerking back. "You're insane." I didn't know what to think. Part of me felt sick watching this, but another part, a darker part, couldn't look away. Shoto kept going, using his ice to toy with Kaken, freezing small patches of his clothes and flicking them off with a snap. Each time, Kaken shouted louder, his voice hoarse with panic. "Seeing him like this makes me happy," Shoto said suddenly, glancing at me. That's when I realized I was smiling. I didn't mean to, but I couldn't help it. After everything Kaken had put me through, watching him squirm felt satisfying. What was wrong with me? It went on for a while, Shoto alternating between fire and ice, never going too far but making sure Kaken felt every second of it. Finally, Kaken slumped, soaked and shivering, his bravado gone. "This is your last warning," Shoto said, stepping back. "Next time you won't get off so easy." He untied Kaken and shoved him toward the door. Kaken stumbled, glaring at us both, but he didn't say a word as he bolted out. Shoto turned to me, untying my ropes too. "You okay?" he asked. I nodded, my stomach still churning. I didn't know if I was relieved or ashamed or both. But one thing was clear, Kaken wouldn't forget this anytime soon, and neither would I. "Can't fight it." When I woke up, my wrists were bound to the bed with cuffs. Cold metal pressed against my skin and a wave of dread washed over me. This was bad, but it wasn't even the worst part. "Handcuffs," I thought, my mind racing. "He's completely unhinged." The door creaked open and footsteps echoed closer. Before I could process it, Shoto was looming over me, pinning my already cuffed hands down. His eyes looked wild, exhausted, and something else, something that made my stomach twist. That's when I realized the position we were in and my breath caught. "You're mine forever," he said, his voice low and intense. He leaned down and pressed his lips to mine. It started soft, just a brush, but it didn't stay that way for long. "Shoto," I thought, panic rising. His kisses grew forceful, moving from my lips to my neck, then my ear. It was overwhelming, and I squirmed beneath him, helpless. He's terrible at this, I thought, trying to focus on anything but what was happening. Then his hands moved, tugging at my shirt, lifting it up and away. I felt exposed, vulnerable, as he trailed his touch down my chest. His fingers lingered, pressing and teasing, and I hated how trapped I felt, cuffs biting into my wrists, no way to push him off. I was powerless as he kept going, his hands roaming lower. My heart pounded and I clenched my teeth, trying to block it out. HNGH, I grunted, unable to stay silent. He didn't stop, his movements deliberate, and despite how much I despised this, my body betrayed me. A flush of heat crept up my neck and I squeezed my eyes shut. No, this can't feel good, I screamed internally, but it was no use. He was relentless and my breathing quickened. I was his puppet and he knew exactly what he was doing, even if he was a lousy kisser. He paused for a moment and I thought it was over until his hands returned, more insistent than before. If you can't stop it, might as well give in, right? The thought slipped in unbidden. I was cuffed to the bed, what else could I do? MHHH tilde, a small sound escaped me, and I hated myself for it. His touch shifted again and the sensation was dizzying. Aha, I muttered, feeling a wave building inside me. I'm losing it. No, stop it, stop, my voice shook, pleading, but he didn't listen. He sped up, determined, and I didn't know how to feel: angry, ashamed, trapped. No, I shouted again, but it was pointless. He ignored me completely. I tried to hold back, to fight the tide rising in me, but he gave me no reprieve. My pulse raced, my body burned, and despite everything, I couldn't stop it. The pressure broke and I gasped, mortified. Shoto coughed, pulling back slightly, and then he moved closer again. Before I could react, his lips were on mine, forcing something bitter and sticky into my mouth. MMPPH, I choked, coughing hard as I realized what he'd done. Disgust flooded me and I glared at him, my chest heaving. Hey, he chuckled darkly. What did you just do? I rasped, still coughing. But he wasn't done. Open your mouth, he ordered, his tone sharp. I hesitated, fear prickling down my spine. I didn't want to obey, but I was terrified of what he'd do if I didn't. Reluctantly, I parted my lips and he smirked, stepping closer after shedding his jacket. That's right, he said, leaning in, just like that. He pressed closer and I panicked. I could have fought back, could have done something, but was it worth the risk? Before I could decide, instinct took over and I pushed against him hard. AAHH, Shoto yelped, stumbling back. His hand flew out, striking my cheek with a sharp slap. Pain bloomed across my face and then his fists followed, one hit, then another, left and right. I couldn't shield myself, couldn't move, and by the time he stopped, my head spun. Say you're sorry or I'll end you, he snarled, his voice deadly serious. Why are you doing this, you creep? I shouted, my voice raw. He grabbed my chin, forcing me to meet his gaze. You really don't get it. I stared, trembling, as he leaned in closer. I'm doing this because I love you. He's insane, I thought, my mind reeling. If you try that again, I'll fight back harder, I warned, my voice shaky but defiant. Cut it out, he snapped, his tone icy. You're starting to annoy me. The air shifted, growing colder, and I knew I was in deep trouble if I kept pushing. He climbed off the bed and stalked away, disappearing into the shadows of the dim room. I strained to see where he was going, but the cuffs held me fast. Where's he off to? I wondered, dread pooling in my gut. Is there no way out? I should have fought harder when I had the chance. Now, I wasn't sure he'd give me another opening. The door swung open again and Shoto stepped into view. My blood ran cold as I saw the glint in his eyes. Izuku, he said, holding up a small bundle. I brought you a present, it's a dozen pens. Pens, I croaked, confused. What for? Oh my Izu, he said with a chilling smile. I told you to behave, did I? The magic of pens. My mind went blank as I watched him approach and sit on the edge of the bed. Shoto was unhinged, there was no denying it. I'd always known he was a little off, but this was a whole new level of crazy. Shoto, what are you doing? I asked, my voice trembling as he held up a handful of pens, 13 of them, bundled together like some bizarre trophy. They weren't sharp, but the way he gripped them made my stomach twist. I'm gonna make you regret it, he said with a grin that sent chills down my spine. No way, I shouted, scooting back against the headboard. You're out of your mind. He tilted his head, twirling the pens in his hand. Say you're sorry and I might give you a second chance. I'm sorry, I blurted, panic clawing at my chest. Please just don't do whatever you're planning. His eyes narrowed. You don't mean it. Before I could react, I noticed the bed had straps, hidden ones I hadn't seen before. My heart sank. How had I ended up in this mess? Shoto grabbed my ankles with surprising strength, yanking them apart and fastening them to the bedposts. I yelled, "I'm sorry, I mean it." But he ignored me, his expression disturbingly calm as he climbed onto the bed and knelt between my legs. "This isn't funny," I snapped, straining against the restraints. "Let me go, you jerk." He dangled the pens over me, smirking. "Here we go." I flinched as he tapped one against my knee, not hard, but enough to make me jump. "1," he counted, his voice sing-song, then another tap, this time on my shin. "2." "Stop it," I shouted, my voice cracking. "This is ridiculous." He paused, tilting his head again. "You're not scared enough yet." "Scared enough?" I glared at him, my fear mixing with anger. "You're a lunatic, I just want to go home." "3," he said, tapping my other leg. He wasn't hurting me, not really, but the way he loomed over me, the power he held, made my skin crawl. I hated how helpless I felt, how my own body tensed despite my mind screaming to fight back. "Shoto, please," I said, softer now, tears prickling my eyes. "I'm sorry, okay, just stop." "4," he replied, ignoring me again. He tapped my arm this time, then leaned back. "Let's take a break, we've got plenty more to go." I stared at the remaining pens in his hand, still more than half left, and felt my face go pale. "What do you even want from me?" I demanded, my voice hoarse. He laughed, a sharp, bitter sound. "Think about it, Izuku, think." Suddenly, he was on top of me, pinning my shoulders down. I couldn't move, couldn't escape. "Do you hate me?" he asked, his tone eerily serious. I froze. Did I hate him right now? Yeah, I wanted to shove him off and run, but saying that might make things worse, so I lied. "No, I like you," I said, forcing a shaky smile. I'd faked smiles a million times, it was second nature by now. "I like you more than anyone." He studied me, his gaze piercing. "Really?" "Yeah," I pressed, desperate. I'd even want to hang out with you all the time. You're my favorite, Sho-chan." For a moment he softened. "Sho-chan? Oh, Izu, let's stay together forever right here." "What?" I yelped, my plan backfiring instantly. He grinned wider. "I was actually gonna let you go if you said you hated me." "I do," I shouted, dropping the act. "I hate you, let me out." He blinked, then sighed. "I'm sorry for scaring you. Wait here, I'll get something to make it up to you." "Are you even listening?" I yelled as he hopped off the bed and left the room, leaving me strapped down and fuming. This guy was completely bonkers. He'd locked me in here, tormented me with his weird pen game, and now he was acting like we were best buds. I couldn't wrap my head around it. When he returned, he carried a first aid kit, probably useless since he hadn't actually hurt me, just freaked me out. "What are you staring at?" he snapped, noticing my glare. Before I could answer, he smacked my arm, not hard, but enough to sting, and climbed back onto the bed. I started, but he cut me off. "You should only be thinking about me," he growled, pinning me down again. I heard him mutter something under his breath, something about ending it, and my blood ran cold. "You're terrifying, you know that," I spat, done with playing nice. "Just get it over with, I can't take this anymore." He froze, his expression shifting to something unreadable. "How can you say that?" I should have kept quiet, but I was too mad, too exhausted. He picked up the pens again, tapping me over and over, counting up to 13. By the end, I was too worn out to yell, just whispering "stop" on repeat. He looked way too pleased with himself, like this was some twisted victory. "Izuku," he said finally, sitting back, "you're mine now." I glared at him, my voice barely a rasp. "You're insane." And he just smiled. Bath time. After what felt like an eternity of his twisted games, Shoto decided I needed a bath. I wanted to fight back, every fiber of me screamed to resist, but I'd already learned the hard way that he wasn't bluffing about punishment. The memory of his quirk prickling against my skin, cold and sharp, lingered like a warning. The pens were finally gone, and though I felt a flicker of relief, dread coiled in my gut. Whatever came next wouldn't be good. He dragged me into the bathroom and shoved me into the tub. Cold water blasted from the shower head, soaking me instantly. "Time to get you cleaned up," Shoto said, his tone unnervingly casual. "Stop it," I snapped, hunching against the tiled wall. "Take off your clothes, Izuku," he ordered, aiming the spray at me. My shirt and pants were already drenched, clinging to my skin as the tub filled with a shallow pool of water. "Take these handcuffs off first," I shot back, rattling the metal around my wrists. "How am I supposed to do anything like this?" He didn't answer. Instead, he grabbed my soaked shirt and yanked it up over my head, letting it dangle awkwardly from my cuffed hands. I sat there, shivering and exposed, as he turned the shower on me again. Water streamed down my face and I glared at him, furious but powerless. He poured shampoo into his hands and started rubbing it into my hair. I squirmed, trying to pull away, but the moment I resisted, the water turned ice cold, his quirk at work. I froze, my breath hitching. Fighting was pointless. My survival instincts kicked in, urging me to just endure it, to let it end. I hated how helpless I felt, how my own body seemed to betray me by giving up. "Let me wash you properly," he said, his hands moving from my hair to my shoulders. His touch was firm, deliberate, and it made my skin crawl. He leaned closer, his fingers brushing my arms, my chest, testing my limits. I clenched my jaw, willing myself not to react. "What are you doing?" I yelled, my voice echoing off the tiles. "Stop it." He didn't. His hands kept moving, slow and methodical, like he was toying with me. I couldn't fight back, not with my hands bound, not with his quirk ready to punish me. My mind raced, blanking out from the sheer absurdity of it all. He'd threatened to kill me if I resisted too much, and as messed up as this was, it beat the alternative. "Have you ever heard of Shiafuki?" he asked suddenly, his voice cutting through the sound of the water. What?" I stammered, caught off guard. "Apparently, it's something men can do to react a certain way under pressure," he said, his eyes glinting with curiosity. "I wonder how your body would handle it, Izuku." "What are you talking about?" I demanded, my stomach twisting. He didn't explain. Instead, he pressed harder, literally and figuratively, pushing my endurance with his grip, his presence. It wasn't pain exactly, but an overwhelming discomfort I couldn't escape. My body tensed, reacting despite my protests, and I hated myself for it. I wasn't okay with this. I didn't want this, but I couldn't stop it either. "Stop," I pleaded, my voice cracking. "Just stop." He climbed into the tub with me, the water sloshing around us, and leaned in close, too close. His breath brushed my ear as he whispered, "If you feel overwhelmed, just let go." I couldn't think straight anymore. The cold water, his hands, the cuffs, it all blurred together into a haze of heat and pressure. I didn't notice when he'd gotten so close, didn't register anything beyond the suffocating tension. My mind screamed to hold on, to stay sane, but it was slipping. "Izu," he murmured, his voice soft but menacing. "You're finally getting into it." "No," I rasped, shaking my head. I refused to be, but he didn't care. He grabbed my shoulders, pulling me toward him, his grip tight and unyielding. It wasn't gentle, it was controlling, invasive, and it sent a jolt through me that I couldn't ignore. I grunted, shoving against him as best I could. The sudden movement jarred me, my breath hitching, but he held firm, pressing me back against the tub. My whole body felt like it was buzzing, hot, tense, trapped. He was everywhere, overwhelming me, and I couldn't break free. He smirked, satisfied. "There we go." I couldn't take it anymore. The pressure, the exhaustion, it crashed over me like a wave, and I let out a ragged yell. "Enough." My voice echoed, desperate and raw. My strength gave out, my head spinning from the ordeal. He kept going, relentless, until my vision blurred and my body slumped, too drained to fight. The last thing I heard as darkness crept in was his voice, low and smug. "I'll make sure you dream of this. A pet and a toy." I'd lost track of how long I'd been stuck in this nightmare. Days, weeks, maybe months, time didn't matter anymore. My mind felt like it had cracked wide open, but some stubborn spark inside me refused to give up completely. If I ever got a shot at freedom, I'd take it, no hesitation. I'd do whatever it took to survive, even play along with this twisted game. Resistance hadn't worked, it just made things worse. So I'd stopped fighting, letting Shoto call the shots while I waited for an opening. The cell door creaked open, and there he was, leash in hand. He clipped a choker around my neck, the cuffs on my wrists clinking as he tugged me forward. I followed silently, head down. I could have lunged at him, tried to overpower him, but what was the point? He was too strong, and I didn't have a quirk to level the playing field. No weapon, no chance. Better to bide my time, act obedient, and hope for a slip-up. "Come on," he said, leading me down the hallway. What's he up to now? I wondered, my stomach twisting. We stepped into a room I hadn't seen before. A table was set with plates, a sushi chef stood at the ready, and wait, another person was there too. My breath caught as I recognized him, Shoto's father, a pro hero. If he was in on this, I was done for. No one would ever find me, no one would care. My knees wobbled. This is it, I'm trapped for good. The realization hit me like a punch and something in my brain shifted. If escape wasn't an option, maybe survival meant leaning into this madness. Shoto kept saying he loved me. Maybe if I played the part, stopped pushing back, he'd ease up. Maybe I could turn this into something bearable. It was a desperate, crazy thought, but I was desperate and crazy by now. I'm proud of you for not screaming, Izuku, Shoto said, snapping me out of my spiral. What? I blinked at him. My father knows about this, he continued, nodding toward the man in the corner. I hired the chef myself, wanted to treat you to a nice meal. I knew it, they're all in on it. I'm doomed. Why me? What did I ever do to deserve this? Was it something I said about his fire side? Did I push him too far back then? My mind raced, but I forced out a shaky, thank you. Of course, now take a seat. I glanced at the table. Conveyor belt sushi rolled by, fancy stuff too, way better than anything I'd ever afforded on my own. My stomach growled despite myself. I'd always loved sushi. Shoto gestured to a chair and I sat, eyeing the plates he'd stacked in front of me. The food he gave me as a prisoner was never terrible, small portions when I defied him, feasts when I obeyed. I'd learn the pattern, behave, and I'd get rewards, rebel, and I'd regret it. It looks delicious, try some, he urged. I stared at the sushi, perfectly crafted, glistening under the light. My mouth watered. Back in the early days, he'd humiliated me, shoving my face into bowls when I hesitated. By the third time, I'd eaten on my own, no fuss. Now it was second nature. I leaned forward, bowing slightly to the table like some trained animal, and started eating. It smelled amazing, and it tasted even better. Good boy, Shoto said, reaching over to ruffle my hair. He added another plate to my stack, and I kept going, too hungry to care how pathetic I looked. One plate, then another, luxury sushi I'd never have dreamed of tasting before. It was so good I almost forgot where I was. Are you done eating? He asked when I finally leaned back, stuffed. Yeah, I mumbled, wiping my mouth. I demolished it all. Since you're finished, he trailed off, and I caught the sushi chef glancing at me, his hand resting on a knife. My pulse spiked. No one would find me down here. Shoto's father would make sure of it. Was this it? Had I messed up somehow, eaten too much, not been good enough? Now it's my turn to feast on you, Izuku Shoto said, his voice teasing. Feast on me, I stammered, jumping to my feet. What's that supposed to mean? Izuku, why do you look so scared? He asked, tilting his head. Why? I nearly shouted. Because you could get rid of me down here and no one would ever know. I'm freaking out. He burst out laughing. Oh no, silly boy, I was making a joke. Guess I need to explain it. A joke? I echoed, still pressed against the table, my back to the chef. Before I could process it, I felt a tug, then a snip. The chef's knife flashed, slicing through the ropes of my cuffs and the damp edges of my shirt. I froze, too stunned to move, as they yanked the fabric off and hoisted me onto the table. We're gonna make you into human sushi, Shoto said with a grin. What? I yelped, sprawled across the table as the chef started arranging plates around me. Shoto laughed again, grabbing a piece of sushi and holding it up like he'd plucked it off me. It was ridiculous, humiliating, and somehow not the worst thing he'd done. Relax, Izu, he said, popping the sushi into his mouth. You're the star of the meal. I groaned, covering my face with my hands. This was my life now, his pet, his toy, stuck in this bizarre game. And the worst part, I was starting to get used to it. More or less. Me human sushi. I was terrified. The phrase human sushi carried more than one meaning, and the worst one spelled danger for me. Yet Shoto stood there, laughing as if it were all some harmless joke. Hey, where are you taking me? The sushi chef had already scooped me up, or rather, his tentacles had, since his quirk had suddenly activated. He was clearly some kind of sea creature, with multiple arms that made him look like he belonged in the ocean. Let me go. My fear was escalating, and with it, my heart began to race. I could hear it pounding in my ears, a sure sign that things were about to go south. Before I could react further, the chef placed me on the table. Sushi chef, don't move or you'll get hurt. I froze. Resisting seemed pointless, especially after Shoto mentioned his father was involved. There had to be a catch, some kind of twisted logic behind all this. Then it hit me, Shoto had used his fire quirk earlier, something he rarely did. His father's involvement and Shoto's sudden willingness to use his fire side had to be connected. This was some kind of deal, and I was caught in the middle. As I pieced it together, the chef began arranging sushi on me. Human sushi, it turned out, was exactly what it sounded like, a person used as a platter. Leaves were placed strategically on my body, with sushi carefully arranged on top. Fish and other toppings were added, creating an elaborate display. Shoto, I suggest you stay still unless you want to get hurt. I obeyed, staying as still as possible. Shoto picked up his chopsticks and began eating the sushi off me, his movements deliberate and teasing. He lingered near my chest, using the chopsticks to graze my skin lightly. Me-hngh. The sensation caught me off guard, and I couldn't help but react. Shoto smirked, clearly enjoying my discomfort. Why do I feel so sensitive? It was just a light touch, but it sent shivers through me. Shoto continued, his movements becoming more deliberate, and I felt myself growing more and more flustered. Shoto, the aphrodisiac in the sushi seems to be working. Aphrodisiac in the sushi, my mind raced. This was worse than I thought. Shoto, did you know? I didn't know, and I certainly didn't want to. Shoto leaned closer, his face inches from mine, his hand brushing against my leg. My heart pounded as he whispered in my ear. Shoto, sushi tastes best when it's close to body temperature. He then moved to my chest, licking the sushi off my skin. The sensation was overwhelming, sending chills down my spine. Me-tilde. His touch was electric, and I couldn't help but react. He continued, his movements slow and deliberate, as if savoring every moment. Shoto, aren't you asking for more? Before I could respond, he shifted his attention lower, his fingers teasingly brushing against my thigh. Me-tilde. I was completely at his mercy, caught in a whirlwind of sensations. The way he touched me, the way the sushi seemed to amplify every feeling, it was too much. I need more. My place to stay. Shoto's voice was soft, almost teasing, as he leaned closer. You're really getting into this, aren't you? I didn't respond. My mind was a blur, caught between hesitation and something I couldn't quite name. The past few days had been a whirlwind, and Shoto had a way of pulling me into his orbit, making it hard to think straight. I didn't know what I wanted anymore, but I couldn't deny the pull I felt toward him. Shoto tilted his head, his gaze steady. Why don't we just enjoy this together? His words hung in the air, and before I could process them, his hand brushed against mine. It was a simple touch, but it sent a jolt through me. I didn't pull away. The room felt smaller somehow, the air thicker. Shoto's presence was overwhelming, and yet I found myself leaning into it. He was calm, deliberate, and I couldn't help but feel like he was always a step ahead of me. Please, I whispered, the word slipping out before I could stop it. Shoto's lips curved into a faint smile. All right. He moved closer, his movements slow and measured, as if giving me time to change my mind. But I didn't. Instead, I felt my heart race as he gently cupped my face, his touch warm and grounding. Izuku, he murmured, his voice low. I couldn't find the words to respond. My mind was a mess of emotions, confusion, longing, and something deeper I couldn't quite place. Shoto's presence was intoxicating, and I felt myself giving in to the pull between us. When he kissed me, it was soft at first, almost tentative, but then it deepened, and I felt myself losing control. My hands found their way to his shoulders, gripping tightly as if afraid he might disappear. Shoto, I breathed when we finally pulled apart. He rested his forehead against mine, his breath warm against my skin. I've got you, he said quietly. You're not alone anymore. Those words hit me harder than I expected. For so long, I'd felt like I was drifting, unsure of where I belonged. But in that moment, with Shoto's arms around me, I felt anchored. The days that followed were a blur. Shoto was everywhere, in my thoughts, in my space, in my life. He took care of me in ways I hadn't realized I needed, and I found myself relying on him more than I ever thought possible. It wasn't perfect, there were moments of doubt, moments when I questioned everything. But whenever I felt lost, Shoto was there, steady and unwavering. "Izuku," he said one evening, his voice breaking through my thoughts, "you don't have to figure everything out right now, just trust me." And I did. Against all odds, I trusted him.